Welcome to this week's Parsha Shiur Matos Masei. 4 lovely ideas to share with you. And the first one, in fact 2 of them, are from a lovely source. I had a privilege of going to a chasna last Tuesday night, 2 days before Shivas B'Tammuz. And as I was about to walk into the hall, and of course there's a table laid out with the nameplates on to see where I'm sitting, there was another table piled up with kuntras sfarim that the father of the Kala had put together, kuntras of ideas on Chumash and the Moyadim, and giving out to the guests at the chasna. So I, of course, took one. I'm a big fan of the author, Dr. Spitzer. It's called Masei Doidim, written by Moshe David Spitzer, Dr. Spitzer, and as well as an accomplished doctor and professional, a fabulous person, a Talmud Chacham, and a tremendous Avas HaTorah. And I flicked through the Sefer, and I've picked out a couple of things which I'm looking forward to share with you. Here's the first one. The first one is from Parsha's Matos. Interestingly, of course, Bilam and Balak from the Sedra 2 weeks ago, but actually Bilam dies in this week's Parsha. The Pasuk says towards the beginning of Parsha's Matos, Ve'es Bilam ben Ba'er hargu b'charev. Bilam was killed b'charev. He dies in this week's Sedra. Now, the Dr. Spitzer quotes the Gemara in Sanhedrin. The Gemara says in Sanhedrin Kuf Vav on the base, in the second box on the handout. If you're listening online, please go to the website torahtoday.org for the source sheet. The Gemara there says in Sanhedrin, Omelei ahu min Reb Chanina. A certain min said to Reb Chanina, Mishmi elach Bilam bar kamahava. Do you know how old Bilam was when he died? So Omelei, michtav leksiv. It doesn't say mefurish in the Torah exactly how old he was. However, al-medichsiv, Anshe dom miralo yachzu yemeihem, a pasuk in Tehillim, that a man of deceit will not complete half of his days. And a person's there, according to the pasuk in Tehillim, the regular lifespan of a person is shivim shana, is 70 years, v'migvura shmonim shana, and therefore, if the average lifespan or the normal lifespan is 70 years, lo yechetzu yemeihem means he will not arrive at the age of 35, and therefore bar klasin v'klas shnin or bar klasin v'arba, and therefore he was presumably 33 or 34 years old. Says Dr. Spitzer, me'olim hoya kosheli. I've always had shver al divrei Rabbi Chanina. I've always had difficulty with this response of Rabbi Chanina. Madua noka dafka shleishim v'shalosh shleishim ba'arba. In other words, the point of the question is that he should just say, I don't know exactly how old he was when he died, but he didn't hit 35. I'm confident of that, because they won't achieve half of their years. Why does it specify 33 or 34? He should just say he didn't achieve 35 years. He didn't live for that long. Ulam. So continues Dr. Spitzer, Nira. He said, if you continue learning that daf of Gemara, the Amud of Kuf Vav Amud Beis, it says over there, it quotes later on, Anshidom Mimra Lechzemehem, Kol Shneisov Shel Doyeg Lo Hoya El Shleishim Va'arba. Doyeg, in the time of David HaMelech, was 34 years old. V'shel Achitophel Ein El Shleishim V'shalosh. And Achitophel, 2 of the great personalities who in the story of David HaMelech, who did not live, who died and were considered Rishoim, one was 34, Doeg was 34, and Achitophel was 33 years old. And therefore, the implication of this pasuk is 33 or 34. That's the continuation of the Gemara. In Cain, Yishlema Shlochein Gelagabi Bilam Nistapik B'Chanina Rak Bein Shnei Gilim Halalu. And therefore, presumably, in response to this min's question, B'Chanina said the same thing. I don't know exactly, but since that pasuk is applied to these 2 individuals, Doeg and Achitophel, who had tragic ends, and one was 33 and one was 34, presumably the Bilam as well, since we apply the same pasuk, we can apply the same pasuk, presumably he also only lived until 33 or 34. And then indeed, that is why that is his response, and that's why he specifies 33 or 34, because that is the application of the pasuk used with Doeg and Achitophel later on in the Amud, and it doesn't say they just didn't reach the age of 35. And then he adds, I looked up the Gemara on Shabbos, and I saw that the Rashash Taka says exactly the same thing, and that's what he's saying over here. So that's why the response is 33 or 34. Okay, that is the end of the first idea, short insight. Now the second idea. In fact, the next three ideas are going to relate to Parshas Masei, the second of the double sedras of this week. So, we have the Masos, we have a listing of all the various journeys that Klal Yisrael made in the Midbar. Eile Masei b'nei Yisrael asher yotzu me'eretz Mitzrayim l'tzivoson b'yad Moshe v'Aaron. And the question, of course, is why is it necessary to specify all 42 locations? It's good chazara, but the Torah is not sort of facilitating our chazara. Maybe it would encourage it, but why does it need to specify all 42 locations? I can just go through the Sefer and work it out myself. So Rashi addresses this problem, and in previous shiurim I've mentioned other ideas. I've mentioned, of course, the Rashi, but I mentioned an idea from the Rebbe and Nissen Alpert. But today I just want to share with you what Rashi says and the Ramban. The Ramban quotes the Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim, but it's a very interesting idea. So here we go. The Rashi says this: Lama nichtav ha'masos halalu lo yidiyah chasod shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The chasod shel Mokum. It's telling me ultimately the chesed of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. She'af al pi shegozar aleim letaltlam laniyam b'midbar. Even though there was a gezerah that Klal Yisrael are going to wander and journey in the Midbar for 40 years, don't think that they were literally running around and journeying for the entire 40 years, and there was no respite. Sometimes, we picture Klal Yisrael in the Midbar, it was like they were in constant motion. They were continually, perpetually traveling. That's not true, says Rashi. I'll prove it to you. There were 42 journeys. First of all, 14 of these 42 journeys took place in the first year when they came out of Mitzrayim, which was before the Gezerah even happened. Because the Meraglim, which was the cause of the 40-year sojourn, only happened later, at the end of the first year. Furthermore, you can deduct 8 of the journeys, which took place after the death of Aaron, in the 40th year. Nimtza, says Rashi, for the middle 38 years, if 14 took place in the first year and 8 in the last year, in the middle 38 years, you had 20 journeys. And therefore, it wasn't so onerous. 20 journeys in 38 years is not all that bad. And of course, they were in some places for a long time. So he learned that from Moshe Hadarshan, says Rashi. So Rashi essentially is saying, why is it necessary to specify 42 journeys? To teach us the chesed of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that they were not journeying the whole time, but if you do the maths, actually it's far less than would appear. Okay, now the Ramban quotes Rashi, he quotes Rashi verbatim, but then he quotes the Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim. Take a look at the next box. V'hisif harav b'Moreh Nevuchim. Gimel Nun. To'elas b'yodiyasa. The benefit of us knowing that is this. Here we go. Omar. Hatzarich lizkar hamasoim godel ma'id. Very interesting point. Says the Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim. The need to mention the details of these journeys is very great. The miracles and the wonders that were performed in the Midbar were clearly true by anyone who saw them, because they witnessed these miracles with their own eyes. But in the future, these miracles will just be hearsay. And someone hearing them could deny them. And it was critical that the signs of the Torah are remarkable miracles that took place. The Klal Yisrael's survival in the Midbar for 40 years and the availability of the Mon every single day. These were places, the 42 places, were very distant from civilization. It was not a natural habitat for human beings. It wasn't a place where you could sow these fruits. The Torah describes the period of travel. There wasn't bread and to eat and wine to drink. And therefore, throughout this period of 40 years, Klal Yisrael was sustained with miracles. There was the Mon, there was the Be'er, the Adnei Kavod, protecting them from the elements. And the Kodesh Baruch Hu knew that what would transpire to these miracles is what often transpires to all the historical events, i.e., that future generations wouldn't believe them. And they'll rationalize, and they'll say, when they were going through the Midbar, they were actually much closer to the Yishuv, to a settled area, to habitated lands, than we realize. There are other people who were there. That there are some deserts where Arabs and are there. They inhabit nowadays. They're Bedouins, and they travel close enough. They're in the desert, but they're close enough to habitated, lived in land that they can go in and buy food and water and whatever it may be. Or places which are close by where you can plow and you can reap. Or you can buy food. There are wells of water in those places. Therefore, the Torah lists 42 places, says the Ramban, quoting the Rambam, that the Torah lists all of these places to put out of a person's mind that we were not near habitated land. We were in the middle of a midbar. And therefore, it's sort of strengthening the veracity of all of these miracles by mentioning the exact places where the journeys took place, that future generations would realize how could all the miracles that took place, and how could a human being survive in those inhospitable places for 40 years? All of these words are the words of the Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim. So according to the Rambam, the reason why we mention all 42 locations is that we shouldn't downplay the miracles that took place in the Midbar, that it should sort of offer veracity, proof of the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu really took care of us for 40 years through miraculous means, and we shouldn't forget that. And that, therefore, we're sitting in Shul this Shabbos. I think it's the longest Kriyas HaTorah we'll have, Matos Masei, very long Parsha, a double Sedra. But the point is to appreciate the miracles that took place throughout the 40 years. We were not near habitated lands, we were in the middle of nowhere, and therefore it proves the veracity of all the miracles that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us in the Midbar, and to reflect and contemplate on that idea. Okay, let's move on. There's a beautiful Meshech Chochmah. One of the other themes in Parshas Masei is that of Orei Miklot, and we're familiar with the whole story, that a person who kills B'shogeg has to run off to the Ir Miklot, and you have a Gemar Din, and once it's established that he killed indeed B'shogeg, then he stays there, and that is his refuge. The Goel Hadom cannot attack him there, and he only is released at the death of the Kohen Gadol. Says the Meshech Chochmah, V'yoshev v'ad Mos HaKohen HaGadol, and he will stay there until the death of the Kohen Gadol, Hashem Moshach Oisoi B'Shemen HaKodesh. Now, the literal translation of that is that he anointed him with the Shemen HaKodesh, which suggests that the person who is in Ir Miklot for murdering another person, albeit B'shogeg, he is the one, Hashem Moshach Oisoi B'Shemen HaKodesh, he is the one who anointed the Kohen Gadol. So on that, the Gemara in Matos of Yudalef from the base asks, V'chi hu Moishchei? Was it really him? The murderer is the one who anointed the Kohen Gadol? So the Gemara explains, no, it doesn't mean he literally was the one who anointed him, but he was nimshach b'yomov, i.e., the rule is that you can only be released by the death of the Kohen Gadol, who was anointed at the time of your Gemar Din. In other words, it's which Kohen Gadol is it? It's the Kohen Gadol who was in situ when you had your Gemar Din, for example. Vapirush, says the Meshech Chochmah. She'ad shlei nigmar dinoi. But what about the following scenario? Let's say, before we had the Gemar Din, Meis HaKohen Gadol, the Kohen Gadol died, Uminu acher tachtov, and they appointed another Kohen Gadol. Ula'achar mikan nigmar dinoi, and then you had a Gemar Din. whose death? When do you go out? The answer is that you go out on the death of the Kohen Gadol, who was anointed just before your Gemar Din, and then you had your Gemar Din. You will go out on the death of the second Kohen Gadol. So even though the murder took place, in the lifetime of the first Kohen Gadol, it all is to do with the Kohen Gadol who was anointed and in position before you had your Gemar Din, and therefore later you had the Gemar Din. You will go out on the death of the second Kohen Gadol. Atkan, that's the Gemara in Matos Yudalef from the base. V'yitochi, says the Meshech Chochma, Rameh Simcha, Tahire Lanu, that the Torah is teaching us Oifnei Hanhogas HaHashgacha, the exactitude of Hashgacha Pratis, HaKadosh Baruch Hu's running of this world. Sheyitochin b'cheik ha'anhaga asher b'shvil sibas ish prati yuamad zel Kohen Gadol. Because who's going to be appointed the Kohen Gadol? HaKadosh Baruch Hu's got to work it out that I want this murderer to be in Ir Miklat, to be in quasi-prison for X amount of years, and therefore I've got to choose a Kohen Gadol who's got that number of years left in his life. Because I want him to stay in prison until the death of this Kohen Gadol. And if I appoint somebody else's Kohen Gadol, maybe that Kohen Gadol wouldn't have such a long life. And I want this fellow to stay in the Ir Miklat for many years. Or exactly the opposite. I want him to stay for a very short time, and therefore I'm going to choose a Kohen Gadol whose life is going to anyway end quite soon. So, ki mazol, because it's all to do with you, the person, it's you in the Ir Miklat. In other words, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to orchestrate which Kohen Gadol is going to be in position so that the person in Ir Miklat will have the appropriate sentence, the length of time in jail, in Ir Miklat. And go see that the Rambam in his Akdama to Pirush HaMishnayos, other examples of the exactitude of Hashgacha, you and Sham. That the person in Ir Miklat is the Sibba, is the cause of that Kohen Gadol being anointed and being in place, So you see that really HaKadosh Baruch Hu is puppeteering from on high. He's orchestrating things from on high because he's running the world. And therefore I'm choosing a Kohen Gadol specifically based on the needs of this person who's going to be in the Ir Miklat, whether he's destined to be there for a short time or a long time, whatever it may be. And therefore HaKadosh Baruch Hu is just orchestrating it all. And that says the Meshech Chochma, one of the lessons of that is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu he runs the world with precise hashgacha. And there are many examples of this. Or perhaps one of my favorites is the Mir Yeshiva. If you just follow the history of the Mir Yeshiva, how they escaped Europe and they fled to Shanghai in 1941, it's the most remarkable story. But there are aspects of the story which are breathtaking. The base Aaron Shul was built many years earlier by a very wealthy businessman, and it was designed in a certain way. You can see pictures of it, and it has exactly 252 seats. Now, remarkably, the number of Bachrim and parts of the yeshiva who fled to Shanghai in 1941 and came to this shul, which was going to house them for a number of years, were exactly 252 Talmidei Chachamim, young yeshiva students who were going to learn in that yeshiva. So you see the actual hashgacha of it all, that you have a shul designed by a businessman, 20 plus years earlier, with exactly 252 seats, and it will perfectly accommodate the 252 people who would need them. The truth is, with hashgacha, you have to just open your eyes. Many of the Baalei Mussar say that it's important to keep some form of notebook, and just to see the hashgacha in your own eyes, and you record it, that's a way of strengthening our emunah. And that is really one of the messages of the Ir Miklat, and Hashem Moshach also of the death of the Kohen Gadol. Okay, now, final idea, I'm going back to Dr. Spitzer. He says something fascinating. If I were to ask you, good quiz question for your Shabbos table, which of the notes for Kriyas HaTorah, the trop that we lane, which is the most rare of notes? So I would imagine, 9 out of 10 people would answer the Shalsheles. The Shalsheles only appears 4 times. It's a very unusual note. and we've spoken about it in the past in various Shiurim. But actually, there are some notes which are more rare than that, and one of them appears in Parsha Masei. It's called the Karnei Pora. If you look at paragraph 4, Umadoisem mechutz le'ir es pas keidmo alpayim bo'amo. We're talking about the green belt land. It's called. You're building the cities for the Levium, and you build some land around it, and it says alpayim bo'amo. Now I've kept the note in the box, and you see it's a very unusual note. It appears once in the entire Torah in this week's Sedra. So, says Dr. Spitzer, Tam Karnei Pora, Borak Pam Achas Batorah. This note of the Karnei Pora, it's called, and of course it's called the Karnei Pora because it looks like, literally it means the horns of a cow, but it looks like an animal horn. If you look on top of the mem, you'll see the shape of the note. It looks like, with two sort of little circles. They're essentially a Tlisha Ktanuk, Tlisha Gdola, double, but it looks like an animal horn, so they're called Karnei Pora. It comes once in the Torah only. Kan Bekesh in Migrashei Ir HaArei Levim, with regard to the fields, the surrounding areas of the cities for the Levim. Now, V'yesh la'ayin b'tam ha'shadava. We've got to try and figure out what is behind this note. V'hinei, B'shir ha'migrash yesh stir b'psukim. How much green belt land do you actually have to give each Levite city? Haim hay elef amos or apayim? Is it 1,000 amos or is it 2,000? Because there's a stira seemingly in the psukim. But Pasuk Daled, it says, the amount of area you have to leave outside the residential part of the city from the wall of the city, v'chutza, elef amos soviv, 1,000 amos around it. But in the next pasuk it says, "Umidosam mechutz le'es paskein ma'alpayim ba'amo." You live 2,000 amos. So which one is it? Is it 1,000 amos or is it 2,000 amos? For kva omdu Chazal al stirazu. Chazal already they note this problem, and you take a look at the Mishnah in Sota and Perek Hey, which appears on the Chaf Zayin on base. For Rashi Khan and Rashi in our in Chumash, he says shenichu elef soviv ha'el migrash. What the explanation of this stira is this: you leave 1,000 amos around the city, which is just pure green belt land to make it look beautiful, that there's green and grass around the city, and then a further 1,000 for fields and for vineyards. That's how Rashi explains it. Rambam in the Rambam says, it's actually 1,000 which is just sort of greenbelt land, and then a further 2,000 which is for Sodus and Kromim. Okay, Atkan Rashi, Atkan the Rambam, either way resolving the steer in Psukim, is it 1,000 to 2,000, that you have 1,000 which is just grass for the beautification of the city, for the aesthetic appearance of it, and then a further 1,000 according to Rashi, or 2,000 according to the Rambam, where it would be fields and vineyards and things like that. Omna. He then brings, Dr. Spitzer brings the softness paneach, paneach rosa. Apologies. The paneach rosa writes this: the mahalach chodosh, a new idea. And again, if you're listening online, please do go to the website and you'll see a picture of it. He's got a picture of it in his sefer here. And I got in touch with him and he kindly sent me the manuscript, so I put it in the Parsha share. But he's got a picture of this. That he's got a diagram of this. What the Sefer Paneach Raz is going to say. Here we go. Sheyimdedu oison elef amo beigel. Imagine you've got your city in the middle, and then you draw a circle around it, which the circle has a radius of 1,000 amos. V'achakach Omar Matos mechutz le'ir es pas keid ma'alfayim. Pasuk Hey says, then you have 2,000 amos. Koloma she'achakach yimdedu kovim yesharim mechutz le'igel litin elav revua. In other words, you then square it up. So you've got a circle because you've got drawing 1,000 amos around the city. So there's your city represented by the black dot, and you've got a circle around it. That's 1,000 amos around it, a radius of 1,000 amos, and then you square it up. But you square it up, each side of the square is going to be 2,000 amos. Because if the radius is 1,000 amos, then the side of the square is going to be 2,000 amos. And that's Pshat in the Pasuk, he says. You've got a square of each side is 2,000 amos. And And then, which Omru v'ho'er batovech kolema, the corners, shemezulas shetach ha'er yesh b'chol ruach alpayim b'rivua hazeh. In other words, if that says the Raza Paneach, the Paneach Raza, very geschmack. You've got the city in the middle, you've got the radius of 1,000 amas, and therefore that circumference is your 1,000 amma, and the 2,000 amas means you square it up. You put the circle inside the square. You've got a square of 2,000 amas, and your gain is the corners, which is going to be used for animals to graze the fields. The additional corners, the extras, will also be for the Leviim, in order for the animals to graze, like he said. Now listen to this. This is going down to the bottom there. Many times the Gan would interpret psukim based on the names of the trop. So he gives a few examples. Kagain, hakadmo va'azlo. One of the most common ta'amim, the trop, is the kadmo va'azlo. The pasuk, for example, vayimores chayehem. So he's got a picture of the vayimore chayem. He's got a picture of that trop. Shekadmo va'azlo, i.e., the actual note is a kadmo va'azla, and it actually has application to those words. Vayimores chayehem. The Mitzrayim embittered the lives of Klal Yisrael. Shekodmu v'ozu, they went up and they went. Shemishum koshia shibud, because of the intensity of the shibud, hikdimu lotzes Mitzrayim, they went out of Egypt terem hazman haroyu, before the destined time. So Vayimores Chayeyem specifically has a note, a musical note called the Kadma v'Azlo, to explain, because of Vayimores Chayeyem, because the Mitzrayim embittered the lives of Klal Yisrael to such an extent, they actually expedited their stay in Mitzrayim, and therefore Kodmu, they got up v'Ozlo, and they went, and that's it brought in the Kol Eliyahu and others. V'ayin sham oid b'reish Parshas Vayigash of Yehuda, and in Parshas Kisis of Nosnu, etc., etc. In Esther, fine. So that you see that the Gaon does this many times. He uses the names of the musical notes of the trop to explain sometimes pshat in the actual posuk itself. Final paragraph. With that, we can explain the karne parah here. From this posuk we learn that the migrash, the area given to the Leviim, was not just the circle of 1,000 amas around the city, but also the corners. Like I said, we square it up. The corners, in each 4 of those corners, we gain the extra corner. The Yerusham Paras, and the cows and all the behemoths would be able to graze there. As it says, it would be for their rechush and for their behemoths to use to graze. And therefore, we use this note called the karne parah, because the kronos, the corners, are for the animals, for the cows and the other animals to graze there. So a fabulous insight that's put together by Dr. Spitzer, and I've copied it over here, as I've shown you, that you see that it's the corners, which are therefore the corners which are used for the cows and the other animals to graze, and therefore the appropriate name for the note is the karne parah. Amazing, which, as I said, only appears once in the Torah. So there we have it. Parsha Shiur for Matos Masei. 4 ideas, 1 on Matos, 3 on Masei. The first is the death of Bilam ben Be'er Becharev. The Gemara says, how old was he? Perhaps we picture Bilam as some sort of old wizard type of person, but says the Gemara, presumably he was only 33 or 34. Why doesn't it just say he was not 35? So because it's based on the end of that Gemara, the Doeg and Achitofel, one was 33, one was 34, so therefore it makes sense to quote those ages. That's really what the Rashash said, and Baruch Moshe David Spitzer was mechavan to that. Now, then we have why was it necessary to specify all 42 locations. So we had Rashi's pshat, the kindness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to show they weren't actually traveling the whole time, and then the Ramban quotes the Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim not to downplay the miracles of the Midbar, to remind ourselves that all 42 journeys were of the Midbar were away from the Yishuv. and we were very distant from the Midbar, and therefore we were recipients of all the miracles that Kodesh Baruch Hu provided during this time, and to really contemplate about that. Then we had the exactitude of Hashgacha Pratis of the Meshech Chochma, the Yoshev Boad Moshe Kohen Gadol, Hashem Moshe Choseh B'Shem HaKodesh. That really the whole idea is to choose a Kohen Gadol dependent on how long the person needs to be in Miklat for, and other examples of Hashgacha Pratis. And then finally the idea of this very unusual, once in the Torah only, note of the Karnei Parah and why it is so called. Okay.